Hello everybody and welcome to the section 1.4 lecture. This is our last section before we have our first module quiz, module test. And this is the last section in this first module, and it sort of tries to pull together all the ideas that we've covered so far. So really looking at trying to summarize everything and get everything into one basket with some application problems. So most of these will be, some kind of story problem or just a multi-step problem. But we're dealing with addition and subtraction of integers. So first we're going to look at solving a multi-step problem. The first one talks about a seal that's swimming in the ocean 5 feet below sea level. It dives down 12 feet to catch some fish. Then the seal swims 8 feet up towards the surface with its catch, with the fish that it caught. What is the seal's final elevation relative to the sea level? So when we're talking about these kind of sea level problems, obviously 0 is going to be right at sea level. Anything above will be up in the air. Anything below will be underwater. Okay, so we want to write this expression. So we start with the seal 5 feet below, so that's looking at -5. Then we go down, how far it dives down is 12 more feet, and then it comes back up 8 feet. Realistically, you could write this in a couple different ways. They have it as a subtraction problem and then addition problem, and that's okay. But another way that you could have written this is just treat it all like an addition problem and said that diving down is -12 feet. That would have been acceptable also. It's totally up to you, whichever way you visualize it, as long as it's kind of the right idea. Just that going down is negative and going up is positive. That's kind of what it comes down to. So as long as we're on the same boat there, I think everything's good. What they do first is they go ahead and they subtract. They use their -5 and they subtract 12 in whatever way makes sense. Okay? Whatever way makes sense to you to do that subtraction, do it, then move on to the next step. It is best to travel from left to right just to make sure that we don't miss any signs. For instance, hold on. We can't really, with this subtraction problem, we can't really combine things, right? We have to do the subtraction first, because if you notice, if I end up doing this addition first, and I treat this as 12 plus 8, that would be -5 minus 20. And when I do that, I would get -29. And that's not the same answer. In fact, it's incorrect. Okay? This is an incorrect answer. There is a way that you can do it doing the 12 and 8 together first, but you never get -20, or you never get 20. You just don't. So that's why we do want to work from left to right. There are ways around it. There are ways to get tricky. But you just have to keep it in the realm of things that you can do. I'll probably talk a little bit later about how we could have made that work to do the 12 and the 8 first. But let's just go with this for now. So work from left to right. It's the safest way. It's not always the easiest, but it is the safest way. So this your turn problem. It says Anna is in a cave 40 feet below the cave entrance. So we're treating the cave entrance as that 0 mark. She descends 13 feet, then ascends 18 feet. So descends means going down. Ascend means to go up. Okay. Find her new position relative to the entrance of the cave. So really it's this statement right here, this relative to the entrance of the cave entrance. That's what tells us that cave entrance is at 0. Okay? So we want to write the expression that solves that, then we want to solve it. So she starts at -40 because she starts 40 feet below the cave entrance. Okay, then what happens? Then she descends 13 feet, so she goes down 13 feet, and then she ascends 18 feet. And we get a very similar problem to the one before. Okay, we use whatever tricks we have to do negative 40 minus 13. I always, like I mentioned in class, I always think of a number line, and I always think of this minus as going left. So I'm starting at negative 40 and I'm going back 13 more. That's going to end me at negative 53. And then we're going to add 18. So this is an addition problem with different signs. I think about subtracting them, and I'll keep the sign from the bigger one. So I know that this is 4, put a 1 there. That's going to give me 5. 4 minus 1 is 35. So it equals 35, but the 53 is the bigger one, and it's negative, so that means negative 35. Okay? So she is 35 feet below the cave entrance. Okay, which then we kind of want to try to make sense of it, right? So if the cave entrance is here at 0, and she starts at negative 40, and then she goes down 13, and then back up 18, does it make sense? Does our answer make sense that she's ending, kind of lagging out a little bit, that she's ending closer to the cave entrance than where she started? Well, it does, because she went back up farther than she went down from her starting position. Okay, so just kind of that doesn't make sense. I would believe it because of that picture right there. Okay, let's look at some applying properties to solve problems. So it says that we can use properties of addition to solve problems involving integers. So Irene has a checking account on Monday. She writes a $160 check for groceries. So that's, if we're looking at her account, that's negative 160 that comes out. Then she deposits 125. So she's putting $125 in. And then finally she writes another check for $40. Okay? And we're just looking for what is the total change in her account. Right? So we're kind of trying to, we don't know how much is in her account to start with, but we know some things that are happening. Okay, it says to analyze the information, it says when Irene deposits money, she adds to the account. When she writes a check, money is deducted from the account. And that's kind of what we said. So we want to use our positive and negative integers. And here they kind of do everything as an addition problem, where they're just saying that checks are negative numbers and deposits are positive numbers. Okay, so we have negative 160. This is a check, this is a deposit, and this is the second check for $40. So this takes me back to that problem that we were talking about before, because another way that you could write this is you could say, it is the same thing to say that negative 160 plus 125, instead of plus negative 40, you could write that as minus 40, right? And if I did that, I wouldn't be able to move things around, because that commutative property that we talk about with numbers, with addition, where I can move the numbers around, and they actually use it right here. They move the negative 40 over to the negative 160 so they can do that part first. That sort of regrouping idea doesn't work for subtraction. Okay, so it doesn't work for subtraction here, but they have it written as an addition problem, so it does work. And the key there is that, and this is the key, I'm not going to go back to that other problem, but why it didn't work in that other problem is that the numbers that I was trying to group, one of them was actually negative. It wasn't really negative, but it was being subtracted. It's like this 40, right? We don't see this 40 as being negative, but it's got a subtraction here. So if I'm able to move it around, it sort of becomes negative. Or in other words, I need to make sure that all my negative signs stay with the numbers that they're right in front of. Yeah, I said that right. So then that's what they do in this problem, is they switch the order here, and they decide to do these two first, which is totally okay. Because negative 160 minus plus negative 40, let me say that the right way, is negative 200, and that makes this problem a lot easier. Not that it's hard to do it the other way, but this just makes it a little bit easier. Okay. And then again, we want to justify, kind of evaluate, does our answer make sense that her account, the amount in her account decreased by $75? Well, she wrote a big check. She put less money in than the check that she wrote, and then she wrote another check. So it should be a negative. It should be a negative amount, right? That part kind of makes sense. So describe a different way to find the change in Irene's account. It would just be that same idea that I wrote down. It would be the using a subtraction problem. Negative 160 plus 125 minus 40 instead of plus and negative 40. And in doing that, you're going to be kind of forced to go from left to right. And when you subtract these, you get negative 35. And then that's a minus 40. And if you think about a number line, you start at negative 35 and you go left 40 more, you're going to get to a negative 75. So it all works out in the end if you do it from left to right. Okay. All right. Number 3, Alex wrote checks on Tuesday for $35 and $45. He also made a deposit in his checking account of $180. Find the overall change. So same kind of problem. He's writing checks, so checks are negative. So we have negative 35. I'm going to use this as an addition problem. Plus negative 45 plus a positive 180. So what do you think? Is his overall change going to be positive or negative? Total guess right now. I want you to take a guess. Okay, let's see if you're right. So I'm going to go ahead and combine my negatives first. I have negative 35 and negative 45. I add those together and keep the sign. So that's going to be 780, negative 80. So I have negative 80 plus 180. Different signs, I subtract and I keep the sign of the bigger one. That would be a positive $100 is the change to Alex's account. Okay, so does it make sense that it's a positive? I believe so, because the negative 35 and negative 45 added up to 80, which is smaller than the amount that he put in, right? So my change should be positive. Okay. All right, now we want to compare some values. All right, it says sometimes you may want to compare values obtained by adding and subtracting integers. In this example, the Tigers, a football team, must gain 10 yards in the next 4 plays to keep possession of the ball. Okay, that's pretty standard. The Tigers lose 12 yards, gain 5 yards, lose 8 yards, and gain 14 yards. Did they gain a total of 10 yards in 4 plays? Okay, and for this one, it does make sense that the order does kind of matter. Okay, so what's going on? They lose yards, then they gain some, but not. When I'm looking at this, I'm saying, okay, well, they lost 12, but then they gained 5 back, so they're not back to where they started yet. And then they lose more, but then they gain a lot more than any other part. Let's see what happens. So our equation that we'll have is negative 12 plus 5 minus 8 plus 14. And you'll notice the first thing they do is they go to changing all subtractions to adding the opposite, okay? So that they can move the numbers around. Because all we really care about is that end result. Did they gain at least 10 yards? So do they have the ball anymore or not? Okay, so they switch it to adding a negative, right? And then they're grouping their negatives and they're grouping their positives. And they're actually going to do those two things at the same time. And so I get negative 20 from my negatives and I get 19 from my positives. Okay, negative 20 plus 19 is negative 1. So they actually lost 1 yard overall. Okay, and they didn't gain 10 yards because they actually lost 1 overall. They had to gain at least 10 yards. They didn't do it, so they don't have the ball anymore. Okay. All right, let's look at this your turn problem. Jim and Carla are scuba diving. Jim started out at 10 feet below. He then descended 18, rose 5, then descended 12. And just from that, I see that he goes, well, so he started 10 feet down. He went down 18 more, came up 5, which isn't very much compared to 18, and then went down 12 more, which again is way more than how much he came up. So he's probably down there a ways. Carla started out at the surface, so this is different. She started out at 0. She went down 20, came up 5, then went down 18. And we want to know which person is farther down. Okay? Or another way to say that is greater depth. So Jim started out, let's say Jim here, started out at -10. And I'm going to use addition on all these. He then went down 18 feet, came up 5 feet, and then went down 12 more. So the beauty with writing this as addition is I can group these together how I want to. And I notice that there's some numbers that go together better than others. -10 plus -18 plus -12 all go together really nicely. And they're all negative. But I do have to add my 5 on at the end. Okay, so let's do these 3 together first. And you can pick whatever order you want to because it is all addition. Maybe I think of the 18 and the 12 together, that's -30. And -10 makes that -40. Plus 5 brings me back up 5. So we're at -35 feet. So that's where Jim is. Let's see where Carla is. And you can do this one of 2 ways. Here's the way that I would look at it. She starts at the surface, so that's 0. Then she goes down 20. Then she comes back up 5. And then she goes down 18. So I write this as an addition problem so that I can move these negatives together. Because -20 and -18 is -38. And the plus 0 doesn't really matter. It's just kind of there. So -38 plus 5. Find your favorite way to do that. You should get -33. So who ended up at a greater depth? Who was lower? Well, Jim was. We would say that Jim reached a greater depth. He made it farther down. Okay. All right, I think that's about it. Yes, it is. Tomorrow we will work on the guided practice, and yeah. So make sure you watch the video. Make sure you get the code word. Probably need a code word. We're going to go with the code word of football, because I like football. So your code word today, football. I'll even do you a favor. It's right here. Don't spell it wrong. Have a good day. We'll see you in class.